sẽ giải tỏa ý trong sẽ đời từ là sẽ cho số mong sao sự lúc nào giờ lối xa liên tục nước tì trâu xong sẽ có xa quý hợp cho bạn đượcว่าnhớ trốn trâu liên tục nước tì bay cho xong sẽ có xa nhớ trốn trong Saint Paul Saint Minnesota giờ lúc công chen cái sĩ thả lòn để lúc công Haum muốn về Hoa Tia United Hmong Vision sĩ thả thiên thua cho lấy tới đây nụ Tiaแล้วว่าเราจะดูเขาตื่นเที่ยวเขาตื่นเลยส่วนสิ่งนั้นกูจะไปมุ่งใช้จะกูต้องดูใช้เจนในลูกของHaumนะsĩ thả
The United Hmong Vision 那么要被要老师有但到被这呢蒙老公说的如何骗我给公说的如什么我给蒙如什么只要鼓励不要如什么只要一多二多但是蒙如什么我蒙做检查他可能没给公的我给哎被我蒙如那种那个的那เขา根据被没找你那要用你的
từปีต่อฮันเดย์了
阿路上到民间了
还早里不到古天龙高手呢但是这种比较朋友叫你这个定力价是的顾客只是到中天，顾大家能够对中几天，好我都老远呢到了海地，วันเดย์ไป有木刀，有主要ไปเรา一度梦是是讲为拜拜，从木将ตัวเดียก็ที่กูที่มัน到ลูกของผมให้ตัวดีขณะนี้ก็ยังตัวเช่นในลูก United Hmong Vision ในอยู่ลิจ่าไปเที่ยวต่อยไปไป
可能呢这样被是的要主到老师塔个被蒙到到包括证那哎呀后来这被有给你家了我们不大过海的要被这给个 learn by making mistake 里อเมริกาให้ไอ้นี่เรื่องที่อยู่เกลเราทอดตาเกเจียเชียคือที่ในจำพงอยู่เกว่าอีเขาเกเกิดซื้อไอ้ชาตูเชียจะเกเดียจิตสัตย์ใช้พงจีเลยเราเนาะไปเจอชัวเราวิเราเนาะไปหมดตัวเลยไปหมดจอดใจไปหมดจะปอเธอเลยบตากูหายเนาะเจ้ากูหายตัวจงพงเสด็จน่ะนี่ชาวโยเชียนี่ชาวเชียงกูตัวลิปอยานะนี่เชียงฮะเตไปหมดจอดใจที่ยูเอ็นตัวเตไปหมดตัวเลยเลยไปหมดจอดปอเธออ่อนบล้อเลียตัวไปเนาะท่องรุ่นเดียเตเนาะ flood the internet จีอาไปหลังมัวไอ้ข้างในยันนี่เชียงลีนอนะเจนี่หลังมัวไปหลังแต่ไปหมดเกกงเตไอ้ไปเสด็จว่าเกซื้อยาโดรอแต่นี่ปลาเกงเชียงปลาอยู่เกลี่อุ่นเราโจตูตัวเราเชียร์เราด่าเถอะวิเราสารก็มองมองนั่งเจเราคือตัวรู้จุยเรา有时的ว่า但是要วิ有啥事有什么做ใจจะเราโต有啥事这样呢给啥嘛没有给到很好但是他ก็没落做ใจที่没得 roadmap 呢จะเรา没找到的一个零了อีแต่是呢被有木好的被人有琢磨录 GPS 叫被木不呀那这里啥的哦กูยัง木看到多大ไอ้เจลีมามูใช่มามูเทียนเนี่ยเจไปอยู่กิน到很嘛早老不晓不早但是เราเนี่ยไปชิมอยู่กิไปมูไปมู GPS เลยไปมูได้ roadmap เลย不要ตัวเราอยู่ที่จ่ายใจเขาเรายินดูไอ้ก่อนว่าเขาดูจงคือที่นั่นจำมุ่งเสด็จนี่ชอบตัวเชียที่ชอบเนื้อเชียยัดเราล่ะอย่าอีกเขาเก๋เกิดอย่าไปฉีกเกิดลิ้นเด้อล้วนเหลือให้หนึ่งห้าอย่างอยู่เก๋ได้ใช้เปล่าเด้อกูมุ่งชี้คุยจะพังยืดตัวหรือรู้ได้เฉยตัวไอ้แล้วชิมว่าเราอยู่ลิ้นนอน่ะไอ้แล้วตัวว่าแล้วตัวปลอกชี้เฉยช่องไอ้เป็นหมู่ปืนแค่จะจ่อเนี่ยนะจนเดี๋ยวจะให้ยานี่น้องอยู่มั่วเราอยู่น้องอยู่ปอตัวเดียวอย่าไปขนาดยังกูเจอหมู่แค่กูจะพังยืดวันยอดตัวหรือรู้ได้เฉยไอ้จะจ่อเนี่ยตัวรู้ได้เฉยตัวแล้วถ้ามันมั่วจีจ่อไอ้ชิมว่าเนี่ยเดียวเราอยู่ไอ้เจลีตัวตีอยู่ไอ้ตัวมันก็แค่ซื้อไปอ่ะไอ้เจลีตัวซื้อไปอ่ะแต่ฉันเอาไปปอกกิโลนะไปหมดรุ่น GPS ไปหมด roadmap จะไปโตเลยบ่จะเก็บไปโตเลยผมไปป้อแต่ยังหมู่เขาเนาะพงเอจะพงบีเนาะไป有洗洗ไปเจอไป有洗澡ไปเจอ洗 energy ไปเจอไปป้อเลย那哎谈论到总统是可是的伢生天莫得去在我前面古人梦ไป有个地ไป一千人在我前的胡家看到古塔等真去古了到古走些人去做东梦ตูรถเจดีมัวเสงมองได้จีก็ยังจังด้านจังป้าเชป้าจ่าได้จีกูจีแม่เลยกูสาปตัวเดียวตัวอยู่ละลูกมองอยู่ละป้ามองส่งน่าสิ
นู่นละก็ตัวคนปอดตัวเดียเป็นมองเนี่ยตัวรู้เสียงมินสตันนะอย่างรู้จ้องชับไปที่อ้อเนี่ยตัวที่จำรายการเนาะเป็นจังเนี่ยสิกูตัวนึงจากกูตัวกงจีจ้องเนี่ยตัวนู้นตอนที่ให้จะกิชิกงหลอดตรงเด United Hmong Vision ใจเนี่ยตัวมินสตันนะซึ่งเนี่ยท้องประเทศจำรายการที่รู้ได้จากเนี่ยเขาหมดกิชิกงดาวหมดเลยจ้ะที่เอาจงบริจาค
แต่ฉันเอามากูว่าตัวนั้นมากูยิ่งปอดเดียววิธีจะไป choose Minnesota แล้วว่าเขา national conference ไอ้เจ้าไปตัวเลยตัววิเขาเนาะจะเจ้าตัวได้ตัวละยิ่งตัวตัวเขาเนาะวิยัน July 4 chỉ ta đi cho tua đây tua chỉ tua ai cho hôm nào sẽ là những trong dầu biết thiệt sai không nào但是quân政还得带肉是的我里不打过喊的是的有给肉剥了就是的这里姜这里菜不要但是他都些在看的估计都些的梦起都讲背看到结果好了呢也กูเขาลาหลวยกูเขียอย่าลาหลวยกูตัวในตัวเจอนี่นะกูบอกกูตัวลาหลวยมึงชิดเอาวินชิสนใจแต่สิเขาเนี่ยมองจะ好了ยังมองรู้นึงนะไอ้กูทางกูก็是的知道到เขาถือตัว被洗他เขาก็ที่กูไปละตุกตินจำห้องไปละเราเคยเชื่อลูก洗他กูการันตีตัวไปจำห้องเดียวจิตจมอนะจีถาตาไปจมอนะไปยังจิตจมอ why not เราเราเคยต้องลูก洗他จานจีน่ะไปเนี่ยไปจีดีในพวกนั้นปอยคนนั้นเชื่อเลยตื้อเลยตาเลยไอ้ไปเชื่อต่อตื้อไปจะนั่นตื้อโจช่องเลยที่ไร不要，哎呀，别去了，是可以写录取他，哎，个就真个正菜个 ，for what？ 估计包含的，估到你包括金产机都忙个都个，哎，他个说的了讲的是多里呢了，因也一考还得 good start， 我赚到这种忙我是多讲边路那的。
ก็จะตัวเชื่อเดียวว่า United Hmong Vision เนี่ยตากีปวดจอช่วงตอนนี้เนาะที่ช่วงก่อนตอนนี้เนี่ยก็รู้จักมันเนี่ยอยู่ตรงนี้จะเทียบปวดเจ็บอยู่ละว่าเขาเนี่ยตรงนั้นเทีย
กูมากูหาลินะนะอย่ากูจีว่าจะกูจีว่ากูตัวว่าเลยจะกูอย่าให้ตัวนึงว่าอย่ากูตัวว่าได้จีเลยจะกูมันจะสักสิ要主个要主目个做，伊也来过还多说的，古到的古这是先看路这跟到那了这，古包努公家古包古努公 graduate， 古到我的家了这古我个做看的，那这古只没写做好的，有些些人的公正的梦起到是，要梦到被保好证了，被有1%的将梦让你家带是呢，被赢了。只还有1%呢，1%的不去不接度呢，被赢了。这1%呢是这公正啊的，古有么被有主么倒是，哎，估计没写着被造好努力，为你过喊的做在被么，拉坦被么走，老也被么，亚那去被有么了的被么，到么做么点么一波也扎那热，错开起手给是。只要让你一起来这样的，哦，寂寞呀，哎呀，到门前么？但是呢，被么full equip， 不呀，被让你都那么爱哇，被上走了，这问题被警察了，被也都牛都啊，被多门出绕到还让弄那边都走了，被得了这，被去到没写还的都到要得，弄那被去到没写还的，被给动了了，被去没写的。bây giờ sư tụm là thế bây giờ cảnh sát tụm là bây giờ tụi mình xe bây giờ nó cho hai đứa bên tôi chủ rau bên thu giàu hơn là đâu có nào tôi chỉ qua đó chuyện gì chỉ muốn nông nghiệp đã chỉ tụm mong là bây giờ quay lúc còn bắt sum trâu à nó lúc xa liên tục thì cầu chi nhớ từ Fresno California nè bây giờ sau tôi chờ ta thì gì là thọ sẽ được cho nhớ từ California là nhớ họ tuần tra lúc chạy tới nè lúc xa liên tục thì cầu chi à lúc cầu chi nút tận đây là gì chứ bây giờ ở trong đại cho tôi chỉ tao là họ tôi có bên đại thế bây giờ cho bên tôi rồi tôi tí xí lên nó tôi ai nên là từ chụp khoa chuyện đó chỉ là chỉ bên tôi rồi tao ai ở trong đó
ส่วนที่เรากูจะเป็นมุชัยต่อเกย์ไฮลูลันเดอร์ดร.ลิปอยาเชอร์เจนเดอร์ United Hmong Vision
กูอยากถามต่อ the purpose นะอย่าวิธีจะเป็นตัวชิ้นนู่นน่ะจะกติcái xinนู่นน่ะภาษาเดียวเธอเราเนี่ยเรามองลูกตั้งกึ่งด้านหนึ่งมองจีนดูจิตได้ตัวเราเนี่ยเธอเราว่าไปรอเลยให้ในอบรมแต่ไปมั่วไปตัวท่านของความสวยจีไปเนี่ยตัวเราอินดูไปวันนั้นตัวจีนดูจิตได้ตัวเราจากนู่นน่ะไปจุดนั้นเรื่องตัวตรงปล้อเนี่ยเราอินดูปล้อหัวไปมองก็วัดก็มั่วเลยดาวแห่ง但是蒙我帮着都一还能的蒙山多一点也老了，叫了呀，你还能山多背起到么？但是容呢也特肉呢就跟蒙哎被我种包呢，只包好热好热，也包好不印度，这个地，也为了家，不要谈没多那时的还的。要为了家天莫种包呢， tàn cho bây giờ này tôi không nó phèn đầu kia chứ cho tôi yêu thích cho nó cũng trái ta chỉ cho hai dia tôi thì tôi chỉ bây giờ cho tụi nó lấy trời tôi bây giờ còn đi cho xe bây giờ tôi lúc nó giờ vì lý do thì tụt thả đi nó lúc nào giờ vì cho bây giờ tôi trong lâu nó tôi thả đó nè giờ để một tu chơi tu chơi mình phải chân phải chơi một tu chơi chân phải có chứ lo bây giờ đến này tụi bọn nó giờ tu chơi chân phải có chứ bây thả đó nè chim bò lên nè một chơi nè thế chả bây họ đà nhờ vì lý do bây giờ ở trong lâu nó họ nói giờ ý giả của cho tôi kia đó nè một example u sát để lâu này giờ ra chỉ cha trai địa tê sầu tổ nên địa tê ổn nên có ít tu yếu chủ phụ sự ít tu nó chỉ yếu chủ lúc bây giờ yếu chủ ở bây giờ rong rong là chủ sát để xin nó giờ cho bỏ thơ ổn bò lia là tạm bò lia tàu làm mượn cha trai nào tôi sẽ kêu nên ngồi địa tê lúc nào biết tôi thả chia bây giờ miệng dầu chia bây giờ bao nhiêu tu cho cái gìแต่สิโลยังเตาตัวไปเตาเปล่าจนแต่รู้จังบ่จนชั่วจอเจ็ดได้คือเต็มภาษาจิตากุญแจหัดเตะตัวตัวน้อยอย่างเงี้ยเราถ่ายเนี่ยรุ่นหนึ่งอีเรื่องไม่ชอด้านหนึ่งก็เช่นนั้นเราป้อหัดเตะไปเชียร์เนี่ยยอไปเชียร์หลักว่าcho bắt hơn để phát để xin của cha đồ này là chia bây giờ phong hồn là ít tu sâu tận dia tây mua sâu tận cho con bọc tổ mông cha trai nó giờ chụp còn hồn nó lo cho chuyện rồi giờ còn hồn thì UN lỡ sâu cha trai là cả những dia tây có chua tu này nó luôn dia tây nó có một bao của xí loạn blo vào lên chắc chắn nào blo làm mơ chắc chắn nào blo giờ ít tôi xem mà xin hậu UN blo tôi một xin thì UN thì Geneva hay để qua ít tôi member cho team blo yon nát từ chắc chắn nào ta xin blo vào lên chắc chắn nào này bộ bỏ blo vừa chắc chắn nào tôi mong khẩu họ nó lo chứ số blo tôi chỉ giờ chồng blo tôi chồng chắc chắn thì UN blo chồng blo chắc chắn hôm đó lúc đấy chờ blo to constitution cho nhìn thì hãy nâng nhau lúc tới chừng lo lên từ trọc tay mình muốn bàn hạ chi lo để cho một cơn lo mới cho là khân sản hãy lâu mà chia gì tô cơn mà cơn tô cho gì xuống sản này hãy mong sau chi sống lo bỏng lo tích vào cái tua một ly miệng giờ bao chi chọn bao nhiêu bao lâu giờ lâu miệng trong ly ta chỉ bao chi cho tụi mong lợi vào cái tua kia thầu cha cha là thầu lọt cha cha của UN hôm lọt lúc đấy chờ tí gì anh lúc nào biết thả tầm phong lúc này là tôi biết bắt cản hay tôi cả của nó biết mong để sao đi chả giờ thả cho cái lò gì nó không được chỉ tàu đó nó không là mệt thầu đó bây giờ ba sinh tờ là chẳng phù cha bây giờ sẽ tông cho tờ TV mong nhầm lọt tên mong nhầm nhà là tên mong nhầm sửa tên mong nhầm Israel hồ tôi được biết gì mong thông địa tên hồ tôi được biết gì ta chỉ biết mong America u ba sẽ được tu sửa sẽ được tu nó áp tu sửa sẽ được mỗi ít very short memory chỉ cho cả hai địa nhiều khó chỉ đấy là cũng là cũng chỉ trong tua tiền tu đây chỉ một chơi phổ cũng tua là bây giờ các cháu nào cho cái gì bây giờ tôi nên đạt mà nên phụ trách gọi là giờ chỉ cho tiền tiền đi ta chỉ là bây giờ là bây giờ tiền bây giờ là ít cho tôi chờ tiền giờ chỉ cho tôi là chỉ bây giờ lại UN giờ cho số lại bây giờ là tôi chờ là mong tiền giờ chỉ cho lát thản pin nhà nó làm tua bây giờ chỉ bây giờ thế lại chỉ mong số lại dia cái số tờ chân chỉ cha họ nói chúa thế chân là chỉ cha họ nói là cho cái gì của mỏ sẽ là cho xia là tôi dùng đi tu chia bây bây giờ nâng tia cho cái gì bây giờ bây giờ luôn mới bây chu li chia tua li chia bây giờ nâng lại bây giờ chia anh nói là thả cho mong muốn nâng chỉ là tôi rồi cao quá ít xe hôm bây nó tụ bao giờ cho nạc sư theo của anh mình rồi nè chỉ giờ cho tờ chẳng mong chỉ giờ mong tụ dùng tụ mong ta cao với dân cho được mong theo bốn chân là theo hôm bây nó mua nè dùng chừng mà tôi dùng tụ dân cho ta cao là tờ trả dùng theo cú ba tụ nâng cái tụ xe để cha nửa nè nửa chỉ dùng nửa tao ít tụ chỉ chia ít tụ xài chỉ chia nửa nè nửa chỉ dùng nửa bù liên cha cho là gì mình gì mò gì đang gì rồi dùng nửa trở lại đó tới tổ tôi nửa hai nửa cú ba nửa nè nửa chỉ nửa bao nhiêu nửa cha nửa chỉ tu xe đâu nửa cú tụ li bỏ nửa cú chia tụ nửa đâu cú giờ dùng là ngoài nửa mong cú sợ chạy mong tôi chỉ tàu xe lo hai đôi cú nào tôi我炒梦炒不多里巴呢，对多梦骂不多里巴呢，姑娘不积极又不炒的，老我梦的，但是以前嘛有了炒我梦了的，那年的经济你多少都一老早只了我后头都能还能，老多都养着都长得还能，我爸的都些。thả khó trên rồi này nhờ nhớ thả muôn tàu hành cho cái bếp kia hậu lực cú chia chỉ một hậu lực qua ai cuốn chờ qua lâu chiều lúc xong thầu làm một lần chia cho nhà cho gì cho cú là cú chơi cho tí cho vì cho chơi qua cú chỉ nên chơi qua đấy lâu chiều lúc xong là有给蛋汤nung nó cũng thế là cho sẽ được ngô cũng sẽ được cho bây là cả tổng gia kế cho cái yêu vấn đề thì đi chia qua đi giá thâu lại cũng sao tao nào tôi chứ ai cũng cho nên qua cũng chơi nào chơi chứ cũng qua cũng tôi đi bỏ ra cũng chỉ chơi mình mỏ cũng một giờ tôi cũng tụ kênh nhiều chuyện cũng cứ tao cũng chỉ nên lo nu ta chỉ cũng chỉ nên toàn nhỉ cú chính chơi sẽ được hay chưa? Lúc sau sẽ tất nhiên là có cú tôi chẳng mua được bao nhiêu nhiều nó cú chính chơi con nào cú cứ tao cú nào ít chia giá đâu là do là có sẽ được cứ tin rằng mỗi nhà trong cả trong một năm một hậu sinh đã rồi nhà sĩ sinh ta chỉ sẽ được đi nhà lan rồi nung nó bị thả khó tranh thằng bố hồ sẽ được một cái công tệ chọn không trong bao cho thả cho lười giả ya bị chỉ yên trong bao nào được hiện tu bên mong chỉ thả cho lười giả bên mong chỉ thả cho hai điều có chia hai cái chỉ một kia hai một quân lửa hai nừng một bố mẹ quân luôn một tháp lâu đã một tua trăm chữ cả xe một quân lửa hai nừng giờ biết chỉ còn tay chỉ em trong bao nào đùa biết cho nó là bây giờ cho bông không lên rồng bố căn cứ mong được rồng đùa biết cho nó là biết cho mình lên thế hòa tôi nghĩ cho mình lên thế hòa lấy bộ bông sẽ biết mong tụ căn cứ lấy chỉ bao là bố cho mình chỉ bao là bố cho họ là bố cho tôi hả giờ daddy are you crazy the Hmong people don't care about you why you do this are you crazyนี่จอเราก็ซาแต่หาที่อยากบอกตัวไปจอป้องห้องตุกแก่นตื่นเราร้องเลยใจตาเลยเช่นนี้เปิดหาเดียมโอเคของเตะกูทอดของวัวหัวกับกูเตะมองนี่มันว่ามันเจทอดเสร็จโอเคของเตะเจ้าส่วนใหญ่กินเชิญหลังเชิญชื่อเชิญไม่หมอเป็นยังไงอเมริกาเป็นเชียร์ยังตีลงเจงเลยอย่าเป็นยังตีลงเจงมากูถึงเชิญนะโคโลเนลกำมันดังนะ我脑我知呢，到国到你要那样。大现在整个就专门毛些，多那也都整做差不多，多年路的他们个包就上，爱整专门毛，
整成年要，我把你都写在家，你都在成了多个都不就行了，个几点呀几包来几，在亚洲阿美利加的呢，你要在加美利加的呢，路整要的龙间，我把你都写，韩国户说的我给工地，侬那个查到真能整正，对必须的梦，真能给我给人人，真能正确。cho nên tao cho nên một lứa cho nên xe lọ xe đá cho nên chỉ tiền tu cho nên chỉ sai nữa tu không muốn gì sao được tu cho nên lúc nữa trên mông thọ cho nó là một cái công ty giờ bây giờ trong bao đi biệt cái tụi nó giờ trở lại luôn giờ bây giờ trong bao bây giờ tao gì cứ tin anh trả để bao rồi bảo đó tên mình nó lom bầu linh nó luôn lử lút tết luôn lử hai người tên mình chỉ lom một nó luôn tàu lút tết chờ là luôn tàu lút không một chế là luôn là bây giờ tên mình lót chắc họ bây qualify phải tàu không một chế giờ bây mùa ấy dân trong bao là một không một chế nên là từ lần đầu bây giờ gì chẳng có chế đâu bây giờ thì nó bây giờ chỉ đó là bây giờ là luôn là cũng sa thong hồ hồ sơ được đó là một cái công ty cho chế yếu luôn nhiều thứ cú thứ chữ của gia thổ lại chờ nó có sẽ được lại cho mong luôn nên luôn nó lò tới tua yếu là nè yếu chạy ta cá một tháng lò nè yếu nếu chỉ yếu thổ rồi đó我还不许多人准备từ chỉ tao sẽ hồ sơ tông được của tôi bỏ nào cú thả ra luôn nên là chỉ hậu này sẽ nên chỉ tao sẽ hồ sơ tông được của tôi bỏ nào chỉ của in person cú đó này sẽ giờ cú xứ này cú tôi nhu cú này pli giờ này xứ cú mua cái công ty giờ thả chúa luôn tao hành ta chỉ pe thả lên nó này cái này bao chân hạt tiềnแต่หอบเพี้ยผู้เชื่อเดือดตัวถ่ายยาได้จียอความเราตัวมงปีหายจ้องเพราะย่อเลยอินดูป้าว่าซาจิตตรงมืออีตัวหนึ่งจ้องมงจะเพราะหมดจ้องเขาอีกเลยอินดูปีสิตัวเจ้าปีหายหนึ่งมงน่ะหมดเลยถือว่าเพราะปีหายหนึ่งมงใหญ่หนึ่งยองจับเลยแต่สิจ่าเนาะก็จะเกี่ยงเนาะยอดจะเกี่ยงเราใช้สิเราหรือจู่ก็ปีจอดเสือขอเนาะเลยปีตัวเสือเราหายเดียcú trong đó có một lý trả là có chú cũng một lý nung là quân đó có vô trò chạy nung này bên đầm lo vô trò chạy nó thì UN vô tới in tu yam rồi yên pe nè rồi tôi phong yên cho năng sự phim một lượt show thông tin tên nó rồi tôi phong cho năng sự phim lo nó yam rồi yên cho nó rồi yên pe mong yam rồi tôi một phong chỉ yên cho nó rồi chỉ mới yên phong cho cha nhân ở nó là tiếp được tôi mà lần đó đi thả bé chỉ một sư họ bé sư được bao giờ họ dùng giá trị bé chỉ tiền gì bé chỉ sư công xe con cha con nào cũng cho họ chứ con lo của đùa con chú có thể lao cho nó dùng nó bé chỉ sư lo chỉ chú bé được bao giờ họ dùng nó tôi bên bảo đâu cho được bao giờ họ dùng nó lúc nào cho chơi cho kế hoạch có lo của chú có thể được cả bông có lo của đùa của lo cái chơi ta cái chùa ta cái chi vàng mình là thao cho chơi gì lúc nào được cái gì thầu bây giờ nó chẳng là sao có nó uốn này tụ mình được sao nó để mà theo từ thao đây là sao là bé ca của trong mình gì ấy có dân trong bao giờ bé cho tới trong là cũng chỉ cho nó ta chỉ dù là một mong rồi nó mong trâu tới mình lao đầu là bây giờ cho yêu chủ là đời của tao mong tao cái tuổi rồi nó tao mong tao cái luôn lại nơi sau thì hunt like an animal bây giờ chia rồi tao bây giờ chia mà chia không sao lại luôn lại nơi sau lại bùng máu này chia nó là bây giờ chủ tầng được họ cái một chia là ổn địnhแต่สิgiờ sẽ được chỉ một cái công ty Xong bộ số nên nhớ nó tới chạm này cả nó nên xong bộ số thì nên tôi nói cái bộ số nó từ chỗ này thì có con chùa lúc tới chỗ nó chỉ có tới chỗ có giờ sản phẩm này cả tiền có bây giờ tụi tuổi trai mà nên tôi bỏ tao tụi mong trâu tên bằng là sao con chùa là sao tao tụi là một cái tua nhớ lại tụi mong nhớ thì nó phải là ở South Carolina nó cũng đã South Carolina rồi mất tụi đang mất tua kia rồi cha tụi đang một cờ cây trồng nông sao từ tua kia là bây giờ cuốn chi kia tụi này tụi chú chơi không nữa cờ cây trồng nông họ giờ có một tua ấy tụi đang tua này có ta thì kinh doanh chẳng nhau không là phụ mua giờ bây giờ ý hay nên chẳng chẳng bây giờ công ty cho kinh doanh chẳng bây giờ rồi đâu họ mua phun tiền thì bên này nó chỉ cho cả là vali này chỉ thả nó mua thả bọn đội mua phun tiền mua nào chứ đâu đâu nó chỉ sử công ty cho có chỉ có con chuột guarantee của tụi bọn cũng guarantee kia cho tụi cho con chuột có chỉ mua như lá nào có chỉ mua thằng này nó tích cho nó này giờ có trái năng chỉ sử công ty có tuần nên tới bỏ rồi vì giờ trong này nó mà từ lúc tôi kinh tế tự lo bây giờ tôi nhớ lúc đấy cho nó chả biết chỉ cởi lúc đấy đang nhận rồi cả bên mỗi người chủ làm mù hoặc cả tàu liên luôn có một bộ đại PhD doesn't mean anything today giờ hai đứa con không chỉ công ty nè cho chỉ cho kỹ thuật khả năng là gì cú tới cuốn gì cú chỉ thôi không tôi tao cần chơi em một PhD là gì cú tới cuốn gì cú chỉ khả năng nó thôi không tôi đã chùa cần cô nên chưa cần chơi nên chưa cần chơi nên cần chùa nó là cú tụi nó thế vậy tụi chơi thế cú cần đó xe thế cú mà nó bỏ thì cái mông đi là cú chế nên bỏ đi chả nó là cú tên gạt cái là thằng này có một cái công ty có biết gì luôn cú chỉ có nên tôi thọ cú tụi lì bỏ là này thì tụi chơi nè để sĩ cú là thằng này nè nên bỏ bây giờ tụi chơi tôi thằng này cú tôi đi bỏ nữa nè cú khi cú lực clinic còn mót tao này ngồi xong cú cho phong giờ cú chỉ ý kỳ cú cho này cho gì muốn hướng cho xong cho số tôi còn mót đơn tan lót cú ban mong cú ôm bộ đi qua taoนู่นlà cú thó này còn bên là một cái công ty còn một cha chạy nó cho là tao cả cờ sẽ bên mong người cho họ từ thó sẽ là một cái công ty cái cú hà thì nó sẽ ôm xong tao我那只要那人就出路了只，人家后边路website雇主手动要好，来一点一边说那些有雇主手动怎么做嘞？别要做工地，然后要做什么路呢？那都给我借了我呢，我做到。
กูจะไปมุ่งใช้จ่อแกให้รู้หลอนเดตุคือลิชอเชเจนในลูกของหอมุ่งไปหัวเดีย United Hmong Vision จ่อเราเตเดนูและมัวเนี่ยตัวหอ UN และ United Nation แกให้รู้เนี่ยตัวรุ่นน้อยให้รู้อังกฤษซื้อยังในหนังสือจะเป้ารู้อังกฤษก็จะในnhau trên này phát sai đồ này.
It is a distinct honor to be here with all of you today and report on some of the legal issues involving the Hmong people and the processes that we have been engaged in at the United Nations Human Rights Forums. In the video, you heard me refer to the right to self-determination. And it is my view that the Hmong people have that right. But saying the terms and knowing the law are two different things. So I thought I would review with you today the elements of the right to self-determination in international law. The first aspect of self-determination I'm going to discuss with you is what we call front door self-determination, meaning that this is the law as it is understood in international forums. The people with a right to self-determination have 5 aspects. The first one, land. The people in question have a land, and I believe probably everyone in this room could draw for me the historical land of the Hmong people in Laos. Second of all, there has to be a history of governance in that land. And if you review the history of the Hmong people, you will agree with me that the Hmong people basically ran their own country within their traditional territory. The third element of the right to self-determination is that the people who have it have something that distinguishes them from the larger population or a different population in the same area. We call that a cultural distinction. And once again, the Hmong people are culturally distinct from other people in the Lao Republic. So we have the three elements, the traditional elements: land, governance, and culture. Since the United Nations Charter, however, there have been two other elements added to this test. Both of them are a little bit paternalistic, if I do say so myself, but I think if you think it through, you will understand why these were added. First of all, the people in question have to have the capacity for self-governance. The United Nations didn't want to have a people take over a territory or land with no practice, so to speak, with no ability to actually govern it. So the international community looks at the capacity, and I think if we look around this room, we see a lot of capable Hmong people who could easily govern one territory. And the last element also is relatively self-explanatory in that the United Nations doesn't want to give a people a territory if they don't have the will to have it. So the international community is looking at the Hmong people as to whether or not the Hmong people actually want to have self-determination. And that is where your actions, our actions in the United Nations, go a long way to showing. Now once again, this test, this 5-part test, land, governance, culture, capability, and will, are what we call front door self-determination. Now what we call back door self-determination is also since World War II and the United Nations Charter. If the only way an affected population can save itself from gross and reliably attested human rights violations, then they have the right to govern themselves. This element has only been utilized in several situations. One of them is Nicaragua in 1979. Not in the United Nations system, however, that was in the Organization of American States. But we've made the case in the United Nations that the Hmong people in Laos are suffering gross violations of human rights to the degree that it can be called genocidal. One of the products, so to speak, of the right to self-determination is that when a people have it, the international community is supposed to side with that people. So one of our tasks at the United Nations is to convince the international community that they have a duty to side with the people with the right to self-determination. The right to self-determination is very, very prominently placed in all the international human rights instruments. It's Article 1 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. It's Article 1 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and it figures prominently in, indeed, the Charter of the United Nations. So the international community as a whole is extremely interested in the right to self-determination, and our job is to overcome the political barriers to the Hmong people being so recognized as having the right to self-determination. Now, in the United Nations Human Rights Forum, we have taken, first of all, the right to self-determination, but we also discuss specific instances that lead to the urgency. For instance, the attacks in the cities, the denial of food and medicine in the Hmong traditional territory, which is an element of the crime of extermination under international law. So we bring up the fact that the Laotian government is carrying out an extermination policy in the Hmong territory. We also bring up the mass killings and the military incursions into Hmong territory, and in fact, the killing of Hmong people outside their own territory as well. Now, the UN has a variety of mechanisms under the Human Rights Council to address violations such as I set out. One of them is the High Commissioner. The Office of the High Commissioner is established by the General Assembly, and the High Commissioner acts independently of the Human Rights Council. The Human Rights Council is made up of governments. So there is a little bit of a tug-of-war sometimes between what the governments want to do and what the High Commissioner wants to do. The Human Rights Council as a whole chooses special investigators. We have special investigators for subject matter issues, and we have special investigators for country situations. These investigators are called special rapporteurs or independent experts. And the special rapporteurs and independent experts also act on their own. They're chosen by the Human Rights Council, but in their work they are independent. And we have met, have introduced the Hmong delegates to a number of these special rapporteurs or investigators on issues relevant to their cause. In addition to the Human Rights Council, we want to take the Hmong issue higher. We want to take the Hmong issue ultimately to the General Assembly and the Security Council. So we have established a sort of scenario or an action plan to address the situation of the Hmong people. But we first have to get action at the Human Rights Council. The General Assembly and the Security Council rarely act on situations such as the Hmong situation without a strong message from the Human Rights Council. Now, there have been Hmong delegates at what we call a treaty body. The one that they have gone to is called CERD, the Committee for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. And this work was very important, but these treaty bodies or these independent bodies don't have any teeth. They can make recommendations, but they can't act. So in our action plan, we have focused on the Human Rights Council because the Human Rights Council can act. The Human Rights Council can appoint a special rapporteur. The Human Rights Council can, and their special procedures, could discuss the situation with recommendations, including recommendations to the General Assembly. And at the Human Rights Council, the High Commissioner for Human Rights can also act independently. So we are trying very hard to get action at the Human Rights Council as a whole and with the High Commissioner in particular. Now, the special investigators of the Human Rights Council cover a variety of subjects, practically all of which are important to Hmong issue. In one of those little clips you saw, I was indicating that. I'm sorry for the quality of the tape, but there's a special procedure for killing, including a special procedure under the Secretary General for genocide. And then there's a process for torture, food, housing, disappearances, the right to freedom of assembly, a whole variety of specific human rights issues. And one of the things that we did in the Human Rights Council is we spoke with some of these special investigators. They're actually called rapporteurs in the French, to get them interested in listening to the situation. There are a number of special representatives and special rapporteurs that are going to be at the upcoming session in September, and it is very important that we follow up with those rapporteurs. We have already addressed the situation with a few of them, and we need to keep at it. Now, I haven't spoken much about the governments, but one of the most important results of our trip in March is that the government of Laos felt compelled to answer me back. This is very, very high. Most of the time, governments just want to ignore what the non-governmental people say and just go their merry way and talk about their own country like it's paradise on earth. But the Laotian government felt compelled to answer me back. You saw one clip, but the government of Laos actually answered me back twice. I, however, got the final word. My rebuttal to the Laotian government is not in any of these clips. It's on the UN website on the webcam, where I answered the Laotian government back. And I said, basically, the Laotian government may have good relations with other ethnic groups in Laos, but the government's own words and actions relating to the Hmong people speak for themselves, and they can't just come here and give you platitudes about the greatness of the Laotian government. Some governments actually mention the Laotian Hmong dilemma, not very directly, but there's movement. We have only been at the UN for 3 sessions, I believe, 3, maybe 4 sessions, bringing up this issue, and to get governments to begin to talk with you and make statements is considered very good. In fact, the Obama administration last September after Obama's trip to Laos, he promised aid to help with clearing the unexploded ordnance that was left over from the Vietnam War. Of course, the United States should have done that years ago, but President Obama did come forward and did commit the United States to funds for clearing the unexploded ordnance. the representative of the United States went to Laos in December, but was not allowed into the Hmong areas and was basically given a little orchestrated tour. I was very interested in hearing what the Trump administration would say about this situation at the Human Rights Session in March. But the Trump team was silent, did not mention any follow-up whatsoever, and didn't even indicate that the State Department would still provide funds for unexploded ordnance. The Hmong people have a huge agenda. In my view, you have an agenda following up on what we've started at the United Nations, and that means keeping a team together, having a unified front, and supporting actions so that we can actually go forward. When I say a unified front, the international community is extremely leery about giving a people the right to self-determination. It's a huge step. If the international community at the Human Rights Council sees divisions from the Hmong community, that is an automatic, we won't touch the issue. The international community does not want to be working with one group rather than another group. I have seen this phenomena in other situations a few too many times, and I have counseled the people involved, please, at the UN, you must have a unified front. After you win self-determination, you can have votes among your people, and you can politicize, and this one can run, and this one can run, etc. But do not throw away the goal before you get there. This is a very, very important message. And some international issues have resulted in basically chaos because of that situation. There are too many groups. The international community has to see one group with knowledgeable, aware spokespeople from among the group, not me, but from you. As an interim step to self-determination, we have been arguing for a safe haven. In other words, while we're trying to generate the political arena so that we can go forward with the issue of self-determination, we're sort of coming back a little bit and arguing that because of the catastrophic situation of the Hmong people, we want the UN mechanisms to establish a safe haven, a place where the Hmong people are safe and can come into, and where the international community can interact with the Hmong community. So there has to be like a corridor out. This is kind of a new concept in the United Nations, not completely new, but relatively new. And I think with enough push, with a unified Hmong front, and following through with an action plan, we can actually achieve that. One of the items on your plate is working out a strategy. In other words, it's the Hmong community that's going to decide whether we go forward, moving forward on this initiative. And of course, there's also the domestic issues. In other words, you all have congresspeople and senators. They meet in Washington. They come back to the districts. It would be very important domestically, it's not my area of expertise on this issue, but it is important for me to address it to you, so that you know the law of self-determination and you know what's going on in the UN, and then you take it to your congresspeople, whether senator or in the House of Representatives, and you say, we're in a catastrophic situation. We want you, number one, to go to the State Department and ask them what they're doing, and number two, to help us out, getting the United States government to take a leadership role, not only directly with Laos, but also with the international community. If the United States took on Laos on behalf of the Hmong people, we would have action relatively quickly. So, I will leave you with suggesting that you work out an action plan, you see the goals, you need to develop the leadership to deliver it, and the funds to ensure it. And if you so choose, I will be there with you every step of the way. Thank you.
一种呢，这个电价贴中被毛出村速度，可能会把大人的给其他人的路共好，无论被活的，United Hmong Vision，古有 Richard 话的话，那该种的村速度，这么星期六啊。